Well, next this morning, cuts. Yeah, I know, that four-letter word we've been hearing masses about over the past few weeks, months and even years now, isn't it? But as Leicester prepares for the City Council elections in May, it's something we'll be talking about more and more, especially now that a new group's been set up in the city specifically to oppose the cuts. BBC Radio Leicester's Eleanor Garney is outside the Town Hall this morning. Morning, Eleanor.
Good morning, Ben. Yes, I'm sitting on a bench outside the Town Hall on this very chilly morning. It's pretty quiet, just a few workmen coming and going. And with me is Steve Score, the spokesman for Vote Against Cuts in Leicester. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
So first of all, can you just explain for me what exactly does Vote Against Cuts in Leicester stand for?
Well, it does what it says on the tin, actually. It's an alliance which has been set up of people who think that the cuts that are being made nationally are not necessary and that the council locally could defy those cuts. It's an umbrella, if you like, that includes different political groups, for example, the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition and Unity for Peace and Socialism, but also seeks to draw in independent anti-cuts campaigners who want to make a stand against the council.
We already have a group here in Leicestershire called Leicestershire Against the Cuts. Are you the same as them?
We fully support Leicestershire Against the Cuts because that is a broad movement that draws in everybody who opposes the cuts. However, it's not in the remit of Leicestershire Against the Cuts to stand in elections, whereas we are an electoral group that is prepared to stand against all three main parties if they make cuts.
OK. Now, you stand for a no-cuts budget, but many people will say that just isn't realistic.
We think it is the only realistic option if you want to stop the situation where old people's homes are closed and shut down, where daycare centres for the disabled are closed, and all the other cuts that will affect the people of Leicester. We think it's time that councillors made a stand and actually said to the government, we are going to campaign to force you to come up with a deficit that exists in our local area. For example, Leicester City Council is making £27 million worth of cuts this year, and yet £15 million are being put aside for redundancy pay to sack the up to 1,000 council workers that they're going to throw out on the stones. Why not use that money to keep services running?
But if the City Council say the money isn't there to keep those jobs going, to keep those areas of services going, and Whitehall say we're not going to give you any extra money, then surely cuts are the only option.
The government needs to be forced into a U-turn, and if councils up and down the country were prepared to defy the government, then they would soon be forced into a crisis. We've seen the students protesting, we've seen other groups protesting, we've even seen some victories against the cuts, for example, over the issue of forests, where there was a victory against the privatisation. So it can be done. Otherwise, we just lie down and let the government walk all over us and let the council pass on the government's cuts.
But do you really think that Vote Against Cuts in Leicester is going to have the power to force the government to take a U-turn? Do you even think you've got enough power to make the City Council make some changes?
It depends how many people come on board. If we can get enough people involved in this movement, we can win. I was involved in the anti-poll tax movement, and I remember people saying you'll never defy the government over the poll tax, and yet because millions of people took action, we forced the government to back down over that, and we can do it over the cuts.
Now, you say you are a group that is standing for election. How exactly are you doing that?
We're standing at the moment in 8 wards across the city. Around about a dozen candidates.
So that's for the City Council elections in May?
For the City Council elections in May. There are people doing the same as us across the whole of the country, for example in the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, who are standing anti-cuts candidates. And we think that this is just the beginning. And once the ball starts rolling, we could have thousands of anti-cuts candidates standing in elections across the country, which could make a difference.
And what about Leicester's first elected mayor? Will you be putting a candidate up for that?
That's still up for discussion. Personally, I'd be in favour of an anti-cuts candidate standing for the mayor's position and also for Leicester South parliamentary seat. But that's still being discussed at the moment.
OK, well, thanks very much for joining me this morning. That's Steve Score from the new group Vote Against Cuts in Leicester, from a very cold bench outside the town hall.
Excellent. That's Eleanor. In fact, you're heading off to Mount Sorrel in a minute, aren't you? So we'll hear more from you in about 40 minutes' time or so. Thanks, Eleanor. That's Eleanor Garnier, she says, right outside the town hall this morning, speaking to Steve Score from the newly formed alliance Vote Against Cuts in Leicester, joining us here on BBC Radio Leicester. It's 21 minutes past 7. Still to come, we'll be finding out how a village in Leicestershire seems, at any rate, to have saved their local dispensary. More on that for you in a couple of minutes. First, though...